So if you've spent any time around Android, if you've got an Android device yourself or done any research on the internet or spoken to anyone, you'll see all these weird names popping up. Ice cream sandwich, cupcake, gingerbread, Kit Kat, just to name a few. Well, look, it's quite a simple explanation for that. It's essentially just a sweet name that is associated to a particular version of Android. In actual fact, since 2009, Android releases have been associated with just that, a version number, an API level, and also a suite name. So I guess the Mac's got Yosemite, Mavericks, Lion, etc., sort of associating a specific release of a Mac with those names, and Android sweeter. So I guess they've gone for the suite name association. Now the latest version, which we're talking about in this course, is the Android SDK 5.0. And it's called Lollipop, or its sweet name is Lollipop, and it's got an API level of 21. Now, I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense to you, but essentially what we'll be dealing with in this course, we'll be talking mainly about API levels. The API is the Application Programming Interface, and in future videos, we'll be going through that in detail, so you know exactly what that means. Just to give you a bit of an example, you can't just use the suite name to associate a specific version. Like for example, Jelly Bean covered versions 4.1, 4.2 and 4.3 of Android with the API levels of 16, 17 and 18 respectively. So in other words, the Jelly Bean sort of is a generic term, if you will, that covered those three versions. So API level is normally the safest bet here to focus on that. And now, the SDK Manager is a tool that comes with the Android developer tools, and we'll be going through that in detail in these setup videos, and you'll be seeing that how that sort of integrates and sort of associates a version with the API level. The bottom line is the API level is the safe bet to look at when determining which version to work with. Okay, so what's currently in use? Well, there's lots of different Android SDK versions in the wild out there. A safe bet is that probably the majority of Android users are running a version of Jelly Bean, which is versions 4.1 through 4.3, which is API level 16 to 18 currently, or that or higher. Now, this becomes important later on when we start talking about targeting. And what about Android Kit Kat, which covers version 4.4 of the Android SDK? Well, that's gaining a lot of traction, and whether it's got the majority share over Jelly Bean, I don't know. It's certainly gaining traction. I'm running that on my Google Nexus 7. And the other thing to note here is that as we move forward with lots of new Android devices, they have got auto updates. For example, my Google Nexus 7 actually comes up and prompts me when a new version of the Android SDK comes out. So that's a good thing, because that means that non-technical users will see that and click the button for yes to update it, and it all happens. And it means that they're not running old, outdated SDKs that haven't got some of the functionality that we want to put in our apps. So bottom line is, as the new functionality comes out for these SDKs, that's a good thing from our point of view, because we want that. We want to be using those releases, and we want the users out there, of course, to be running as newer version as possible. So with the release of version 5 of Android Lollipop, that's API level 21, and I personally think a lot of people are going to be upgrading because of the cool new features. Now we're going to go through and talk a lot about those new features in another video, but there's some really good sort of end user features. Like for one example is with the camera functionality has been dramatically upgraded. So I can see that that's going to happen a lot. So that's a good thing. As I mentioned, as developers, we want our user base to be running pretty well the latest version of the SDK, because then we don't have to sort of try and cater for all the old versions as well. So we want to really just focus on that new version if at all possible. So in terms of targeting, and again, we'll have there is a video in this course which talks about this in more detail, but it is possible to target specific versions. So for example, we can use the latest version 5 SDK, Lollipop, but we can also target older devices. So and target, or we can actually sort of say put a minimum in there so we can support the older devices, in other words. So that's a good thing, because it means that we don't want to alienate our user base. So we don't want to produce a new app that only version 5 people can use, because otherwise anyone who's running an older version in theory wouldn't be able to run this, or there may be some features that we've put in the app that they won't be able to use. But we'll be talking more about that in a future video as well.